Every day, every single day, things are happening in the world of deals and deal makers. And there's never enough time to keep up with every company, transaction, announcement, or whatever. It's just exhausting. And we have a new product to help fix that. This is Axios Pro Deals, a new premium subscription product bringing you tailor-made insights like never before. For the last 5 years, Axios has helped deal professionals navigate the whole deal landscape with Pro Rata. With Axios Pro Deals, we're diving deeper into the industries that matter most to you. You just want stories on fintech? There's a newsletter for that. MedTech deals? We've got you covered. The future of retail? We'll guide you. With Axios Pro Deals, you're going to be getting all of this industry-specific insight and expert analysis at a level you simply can't get anywhere else. So if you're a venture capitalist, private equity investor, banker, trader, founder, executive, anyone who cares about deals, Axios Pro is what you need to help you understand what matters and why. Start your free trial today at AxiosPro.com.
Five years ago, we started Axios with the mission to get you smarter, faster on topics that matter. We get you smarter about national topics like tech, politics, and sports. We make you smarter about your community with Axios Local. And now we want to get you smarter, faster about your job with Axios Pro. Finding the right news and information for your work can be daunting. And most of the time, when you do find what you need, the information is just too long and too boring. You should be using your time to make decisions, not sorting through noise. Axios Pro is here to help you make smarter decisions faster. Our deeply sourced reporters will give you actionable intelligence that's delivered in a way that's quick and easy to read. No fluff, just the good stuff. With Axios Pro, we're going to focus on the industries that matter to you. Each industry will have its own dedicated team of resources and reporters who know these industries inside and out. Every weekday will bring you important information and analysis that you can't get anywhere else. And guess what? This is just the beginning. Start your free trial at AxiosPro.com.
Hello and welcome to our Axios Pro Energy Policy virtual event. I'm Nick Sopcich, Energy Policy Reporter for Axios Pro. I'd like to welcome our audiences on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @AxiosPro and the hashtag AxiosPro. For the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleague, J.L. Holzman. And ahead of Earth Day, we'll dive deep with two leading lawmakers on implementing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Our first guest is Maryland Congressman Steny Hoyer. Thanks for joining us, Congressman.
Thank you very much, Nick. Good to be with you.
So it's almost Earth Day, and one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about recently is implementation of the climate programs from the IRA and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And I think folks watching here in DC probably know those laws and what they do, but there's polling suggests that relatively few Americans know about them.
Right.
And it's part of why Democrats formed the Regional Leadership Council. So can you, which you now chair, so can you tell us a little bit about that council and how it's engaging with the administration on IRA?
You're exactly right. First of all, let me talk something about Earth Day. I graduated from Suitland High School, and I remember on April 22nd, 1970, being at Suitland High School and talking about Earth Day, which is when it started some years ago. And I remember then Governor Jerry Brown saying that Earth was like a space capsule for us, and that the environment in that space capsule was absolutely essential for our survival. And I thought that was such a powerful way of talking about our globe, our environment, our atmosphere, our clean water, clean air. And what we did in this past Congress was one of the most significant investments in making sure that global spaceship that we're on, called Earth, is sustainable. And we invested large sums of money and brought down costs for people, making their houses, their cars, their lives more energy saving. And in that respect, as you pointed out, we think we did a lot. But unfortunately, because there's so much going on in everybody's people's lives, they didn't know about it. So Mr. Jeffries, our new leader, wanted to start a regional leadership council. And he asked me to chair that. And the purpose of that, as you point out so well, is to make sure that the extraordinary things that we did, they're going to bring prices down and help our environment and ensure our safety and health in the future, are known by the American public so they can access those resources. And frankly, I think it'd be appreciative of the actions that their members of Congress took in the 117th Congress.
So what are the challenges here? How do you get people to use some of that money on the consumer side with, to install a heat pump, for example, or to buy an EV?
Well, first of all, they have to know, A, that it's available. B, then they need to know how to access that when they buy an electric car, or they buy a heat pump, or they do something that makes their home more energy efficient. They've got to know about it. So the Regional Leadership Council was formed, A, to identify what's available. Critically important. You got to know what's out there. And secondly, to make sure we implement those programs so they go into effect and are actually available. And thirdly, we've got to inform the American people, look, this is what we've done. This is what's available. It's going to bring down your costs. It just doesn't deal directly with the environment. It's going to bring down your health costs. It's going to make inflation less costly to you. But it's also going to give you help making your lives energy efficient, which will not only be good for the consumer, but good for the environment and good for that global spaceship that Brown was talking about. So how do you do that? Identify, implement, and then inform. And we've got the regional council, but we've also got 201 other members. I guess I'm the 13th, so 200 other members who we're going to make sure they have the information they need and make sure that they then turn around and communicate that to people in their district. But we want to communicate, frankly, to 435 districts, not just 213 Democratic districts, because everybody in this country is going to be benefited by, and to the extent they know what to do and how to save, our globe will be better. Our environment will be better. And if that's the case, then Earth Day will be better, and we can be happier about what we've done.
So these are obviously two enormously complicated laws. There's been some criticism from the Hill in terms of the administration's implementation, most prominently from Senator Manchin on the EV tax credit. I'm wondering, where you think the administration is doing a good job implementing the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law, and if there's anywhere where they could speed it up a little bit or do better.
Well, I think every one of us can do better. But I think the administration is doing an excellent job. I think the president has put in place, for instance, Mitch Landrieu, to make sure that, in fact, the implementation of the infrastructure bill goes smoothly. He's asked John Podesta, a former chief of staff for a number of the presidents of the United States of America, asked him to focus on the climate issues because he believes they're very important. And so what all of us are doing is trying to make sure, A, we know what there is, and we make sure that it's implemented, and then all of us communicate. And that's why the president's traveling around the country. That's why Vice President Harris is traveling around the country. That's why members are having town meetings and telephone town halls and putting out newsletters about what we did, what's available, and how it helps the American people and how it helps our environment. So I think, personally, Nick, I think the president is doing a good job. He's focused. He's asked every cabinet member to have a person directly focused on this issue, and for them to work with our regional council to make sure that we're working together to inform the American people so they can get the benefits of some extraordinarily historic legislation. The largest investment in climate amelioration was made in the last Congress to make the environment better, to make human activity focus on what is the least harmful or the most helpful, how positively looking at it to our environment, and again, in terms of cost, bringing costs down, particularly in an era where inflation is making it tough for people in some instances to get by. Any savings they can have, whether it's healthcare, as was included in the Inflation Reduction Act, substantial reduction in healthcare costs, but also in their cost of keeping their homes warm while also protecting the environment.
So Republicans obviously have a couple different proposals on the table to claw back some of that IRA money. They're looking at the conservation program in the Farm Bill, and now they have this debt ceiling proposal that they rolled out to essentially repeal all the IRA energy tax credits. You know, you're a former member of leadership. What have you learned from past fights about these must-pass bills, especially the debt ceiling, you know, and how do Democrats fight this from the minority?
The irony, Nick, is that the proposals of the Republican are, at a time when they say want to reduce inflation, are going to increase costs for consumers. So exactly the opposite of what they say they want to do is what they're proposing to do. Secondly, if they repeal the IRA brings the budget deficit down by $300 billion. So if they repeal it, what's going to happen is that $300 billion reduction will not occur, and therefore they're going to increase the debt. So again, they're saying one thing and doing just the opposite. So that I would hope that they would stop playing politics and focus on people. We need to put people over politics. We need to put people first. We need to make sure that people are served, not political rhetoric and political gamesmanship. And so I think that their first bill, for instance, was a bill on the IRS, which will increase the deficit by a very, very substantial amount, which they passed through the House of Representatives. And they knew it because it was scored, I think, at $2.1 trillion. I'm looking at somebody over here who knows perhaps the answer more specifically, but a very substantial amount of dollars increased. So on the one hand, they talk about, we got to bring the debt down. They are correct. We spent a lot of money, necessarily spent a lot of money on confronting COVID and the challenge that it caused to the American people and the over 1 million deaths that we had as a result of that. And so what did we do? We passed a bill called the American Recovery Plan, which cost over $1 trillion, but it got money in the pockets of people who were really having a tough time because of COVID. It put kids back in schools by giving money to schools so they could make them healthy and not at risk for teachers, for parents, for staff, for children. And then we put money into making sure that people could get vaccines, which would save them from the COVID-19. So every Republican voted against that. In other words, voted against the bill, which was going to help people in very hard times. They talk about wanting to help them about inflation. It wasn't a question of inflation then. It was a question that they had no money coming in. They talk about, we want to get kids back in school. It was a mistake to not have them in school. And they vote against legislation which got kids back in school. So, Nick, we're dealing with, I think, too much politics and too little substance. What we have dealt with in the bills that we are working with as the Leadership Council are bills that were very substantive, focused on what people need focused on what our country needs, focused on building manufacturing, creating jobs so that people can make it in America. And the Republicans are focused on political rhetoric for some of their special interest friends.
So the other aspect of that debt ceiling proposal is a permitting overhaul. I am not under the impression that Democrats are going to accept all of HR 1 as part of a debt ceiling deal. But do you think there's a way for permitting reform, a bipartisan permitting proposal, to ride on a debt ceiling deal?
Do I think there's a chance of getting some bipartisan agreement? I hope so. And the reason I hope so is we have made some extraordinary proposals in these bills that we want to implement to help our environment. And we need to get those processes in place. And we need to make sure that our permitting processes are honored in protecting our environment, but not implemented in a way that prohibits getting us quickly forward on progress on energy conservation and cleaning up our air and our water. So I'm hopeful that we can get a bipartisan agreement.
I want to also address, with the time that we have left, deforestation, because this has been a big issue of yours. You have a bill known as Amazon 21 that basically authorizes some State Department money to, keep forests around the world intact. Do you have plans to reintroduce that, and what are the next steps there?
As a matter of fact, I was talking to Mr. Westerman yesterday. I'm going to be talking about Mr. Westerman in the next week or so, who chairs the committee that has jurisdiction on that. The bill Amazon stands for ameliorating nature's failure to keep our air clean, because that's really the biggest issue we have. We're losing forests, we're losing peat bogs, we're losing wetland, all of which absorb CO2 from the air, or by keeping our trees in place, keeping CO2 from going into the air. So that we're going to reintroduce that. I'm trying to now get to see if we can get bipartisan support from Republicans and Democrats. I think we all want to make sure that those trees are in place. The President of the United States, in his first budget, proposed $9 billion investment in making sure not just the Amazon basin, not just Brazil, and there are 4 other countries that have the Amazon in it, but also all over the world where you have these rainforests, peat bogs, wetlands, to assist countries in maintaining them, so we can keep them doing the job they do, which is keeping our air clean. And so I'm going to reintroduce that. I've talked to people in the Senate about it. We had bipartisan sponsorship in the Senate. And I want to make sure we have bipartisan sponsorship here, because this is a critical area when we talk about Earth Day, because there's more CO2 released because of that than there are by other matters, including automobiles. And if we can clean up our automobiles, i.e., make sure that we have electric vehicles through the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, encouraging and investing in Americans buying smartly from an energy standpoint and from an environmental standpoint, we will take a giant step forward in making sure our globe is sustainable for generations yet to come.
All right. Well, that's about all we have time for in this segment. Thank you, Congressman Hoyer, for joining Axios.
Nick, thank you. And thank you for focusing on this, because one way that we're going to get this information out to people is people like yourself understanding how important it is to do that and then doing it. Thank you very much.
And now over to my colleague, J.L. Holzman, for the next segment.
Thanks, Nick. I'm J.L. Holzman, energy policy reporter for Axios Pro. Our next guest today is California Congressman Jared Huffman. Hey, Congressman. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, everybody. Happy Earth Day.
So we're here almost 1 year after the passage of the IRA. What do you think is the biggest hurdle to notching major wins with that law and the recent infrastructure law for the climate?
Well, the biggest hurdle was certainly getting it through the Senate and getting it onto President Biden's desk. We had passed an even more ambitious bill out of the House, as you know. Senator Manchin had pretty much led the whole world to believe he was done with it all, and there was no chance of a serious climate bill. And then he kind of surprised everyone by agreeing to a slightly diminished but still very significant climate package in this IRA. So that was the big political mountain to climb. We did it, and now it's just about implementation.
What do you think's the biggest hurdle on the implementation side?
I think speed. This money needs to get out quickly to have the desired, transformational effect that we want to see. We don't have a lot of time in this climate crisis. And so we certainly don't have time for, long regulatory proceedings and policy guidance that takes, many, many months and years to roll out. We got to move quickly.
That's certainly true given our reporting on the pace of global warming. Like many in the press, we're hearing from industry folks that a huge hurdle to the IRA netting big climate gains is the pace of federal permitting today. I guess, first of all, do you think this is true?
Well, for energy transmission, for electricity transmission, that's absolutely true. I think pretty much everybody agrees we need to speed that up. But that's just the problem statement. And by the way, there's disagreement about the problem statement. You have a lot of politicians lamenting how long it takes to permit things. What they're really talking about is fossil fuel infrastructure. And I am happy to let that languish in the longest permitting line, any bureaucrat could conceive. I'm interested in moving clean energy and electrical transmission upgrades faster. And there's some ways to do that, and they're different than some of the things you hear thrown around as so-called permitting reform in Washington.
So help me understand, how are you trying to respond to these sentiments? What do you think the solutions are here?
Yeah, I think first of all, you've got to be more narrowly targeted in what you're trying to do. We do not need to speed up fossil fuel infrastructure approvals. If anything, we need to just stop approving fossil fuel infrastructure altogether. But we do need to electrify everything in this country if we're going to decarbonize. And that means a lot more transmission lines, especially for offshore wind and big renewable projects that are literally, in some cases, waiting to be plugged in and to come online.
I'm struck by an example that I've uncovered in my reporting, the situation around ports. Port authorities are seeking funding for upgrading their facilities, their infrastructure in ways that could help reduce emissions. But to get financing under the infrastructure law and likely under the IRA, they're going to need to have permits, or at least have a pretty clear timeline that's predictable for permitting their projects. At the same time, I certainly understand your focus on transmission. Can you just help me understand, is there a red line, I guess, for you in terms of accepting any kind of legislation on permits that would expedite fossil fuel permitting? Is your concern that any deal could speed up fossil fuels?
We shouldn't be speeding up fossil fuel, full stop. We're supposed to be tackling a climate crisis here. And so we really have to be smart and strategic about what we do in this space of permitting reform. But there are some very discrete things that we can and should do to speed up clean energy infrastructure deployment. And some of that we've already done. And this doesn't get enough attention. We put $1 billion into the IRA to address the number one cause for permitting approval delays. And that is federal agencies that just don't have the resources to quickly do environmental reviews or to do the kind of coordination up front that speeds up environmental review processes. So $1 billion is there. It is already making a difference. And so when you hear sometimes about how long it may take to approve a transmission line or some other project, that is a backward-looking statistic that predates the addition of this $1 billion for the environmental review teams that should speed things along. And the other thing that's happened is President Biden has issued some executive orders to create some streamlining and some upfront whole of government coordination that hasn't been there in the past. So put these things together, I think projects will begin to move faster. We've still got to do some more, though, in the space, especially of FERC reform, FERC being the federal agency that has primary jurisdiction over these electrical transmission facilities.
Just to, I guess, since we're on this topic, Republicans have been trying to add HR 1 and a host of clawbacks on the IRA to debt ceiling talks. What's the Progressive Caucus plan to fight back to this?
Well, we need to defeat HR 1. We will probably lose that fight in the House. They can pass anything they want in the fossil fuel energy space out of this House. But it should stop there. I don't think there's any way that it advances in the Senate, and the administration has been strong. So the Progressive Caucus and really, our allies in the New Dems and other caucuses over here in the House are fairly well aligned against HR 1. We just need to stay close and appreciate the fact that the White House is doing the right thing here.
So you think adding HR 1 to any debt ceiling liftoff would be a non-starter for progressives?
Not just progressives. I think the White House signaled that pretty clearly today.
On a separate topic, we're seeing critics of the IRA now focused on public campaigns to dampen enthusiasm for the industries that law boosted, like offshore wind and consumer EVs. How should Democrats and energy and climate folks in policy circles try to respond to these campaigns to shore up support for the law and ensure these industries, which climate experts say we should boost, are not diminished in any way?
Yeah, I think we got to just hit them with the truth, hit them with the facts. It's pretty amazing. It has not yet been a year since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, and you are already seeing billions and billions of dollars of investment pouring in to communities around this country in response to these incentives that we put on the table. A lot of this is happening in red states and in red congressional districts. I think it's going to be very hard for some of our colleagues across the aisle to somehow demonize and vilify these good things that are bringing all sorts of investment and jobs to places that really need it in Republican parts of the country.
Given your background, just to probe a little bit further, the subject of offshore wind and whale deaths. You and I have spoken about this before. You've made clear that it may not be a great idea to humor a lot of the theories bandied about right now, given the lack of evidence for cause death of these whales from offshore wind. However, do you think that there's any room in all of this concern to potentially find common ground in Congress to protect endangered and imperiled whale species?
I would like to believe there is, but that would require these newfound concerns from my colleagues across the aisle about whales to be genuine. And I'm a little worried that it's kind of a sham. Because for years I've been working to protect whales, including some of the most endangered ones, the North Atlantic right whale. And we just discovered a very rare whale species in the Gulf of Mexico that's critically endangered. And we've given them opportunities to join us in legislation that would actually address the threats to these species, keep them from going extinct. They're really uninterested when presented with a straight up, let's protect whales opportunity here in Congress. But when it comes to these astroturf groups that are kind of posing conspiracy theories that somehow offshore wind is behind the whale mortalities on the Atlantic coast, suddenly they perk up and they get very interested. Maybe they care a little about whales now. So this is not on the level, shall we say. We will keep taking serious efforts to protect our whales. We love our whales. But the truth is, offshore wind is not one of the serious threats that is impacting our whale populations on the Atlantic coast or anywhere else. And all of the offshore wind projects that move forward are going to have to comply with the Marine Mammal Protection Act and other protective measures.
I have one last question for you. I like to ask this of folks I speak with. What's the last song you listened to?
A fairly obscure tune by a singer-songwriter named Chris Smither called Origin of Species. It's worth a listen if you like incredibly smart lyrics.
Does it relate to imperiled wildlife and imperiled species?
No, it's a kind of a irreverent take on literal biblical interpretation and natural selection.
Well, your takes on policy and your music selections are always novel and interesting to hear. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with me. Thank you so much for joining Axios today, Congressman.
Thanks for having me. Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that made everyone smarter, faster. For the latest on what's happening in energy policy on Capitol Hill, or to subscribe to Axios Pro, visit axios.com/pro. And thanks for joining us. Here's $200 off Axios Pro. Just use code PROEVENT, one word, PROEVENT, when you start your free trial. Thank you again for joining. We'll see you on axios.com/pro. Happy Earth Day, everyone.